Breaking news.
Breaking news.
Breaking news out of Washington, D.C.
An American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members collided with a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter.
A really scary incident there.
9 days after Donald Trump returned to the White House, a terrible mid-air collision over Washington. The president hints that controversial diversity hiring programs may be to blame.
The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. They can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. That's a pretty shocking claim from President Trump, but is he right or even partially right? Coming up on this program, we'll be asking a former air crash investigator if so-called diversity hiring is making flying more dangerous.
I've only heard allegations. They would ask questions about what type of music do you like? And of course, if you answered rap, they suspected you were black.
Also coming up, did DEI hiring make the LA fires worse?
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you.
Which would sound kind of racist if a Southern sheriff said it.
A fierce DEI debate coming up.
The idea that you feel that there is a fair playing field out there is ludicrous to me.
You have white students pretending to be black in college applications because of all the benefits that are flowing to blacks.
But first, a quick look at the crash over Washington, which claimed the lives of 67 people. New video shows the US Airlines plane and Black Hawk helicopter moments before impact. 64 people are on board the passenger plane. 3 are on the military helicopter. Both aircraft plummet into the Potomac River shortly before 9 p.m. The plane was on its final approach to Ronald Reagan Airport, flying through an area so busy with military choppers, it's nicknamed Helicopter Alley. Air traffic control had reportedly directed the Black Hawk to fly at below 200 feet, but it was 100 foot higher. It's also reported that there was only one controller focused on helicopters on duty, when normally there would be 2. A day after the crash, Trump said that the Federal Aviation Administration may be to blame for hiring DEI controllers, but he wasn't sure.
64 people lost their lives last night. If you aren't confident that DEI had any role, why bring it up?
Well, all I'm talking about is competence, and we want in that particular position, we have to have the most competent people in our country because we're talking about lives. Now, it may or may not have had to do, but I don't like the fact that the helicopter was at the exact same level as the airplane. A tragic story. So, I don't know, do you blame it on the air traffic controller too, in addition to the pilots? Maybe the pilot's fault, they should have seen it. I would have thought they should have seen it, because it was a plane that was loaded up with lights.
Like the president, the CEO of American Airlines is also not waiting for investigators. He appears to be blaming the Black Hawk pilot.
It collided with a military aircraft on an otherwise normal approach. And at this time, we don't know why the military aircraft came into the path of the PSA aircraft.
The Black Hawk was being piloted by 28-year-old Rebecca Loback, who was being assessed by 39-year-old flight instructor Andrew Eves. 29-year-old Staff Sergeant Ryan O'Hara was also on board. The military initially withheld Loback's name in accordance with her family's wishes.
There were 3 people on the Black Hawk. One of them was a woman. That woman's family is afraid to put her name out there because they know that she will be blamed for this crash despite there being absolutely no evidence one way or another.
It's since been revealed that Rebecca Loback had recently worked as an aide to President Joe Biden, and the internet is now rife with speculation that she was a DEI hire who attended many gay pride events. Well, let's discuss this now with our panel. And today we have Arthur Rosenberg, a former pilot who is now an aviation attorney. And we also have Alan Diehl, a former air crash investigator who actually survived a crash himself. Welcome to the program, both of you. Alan, if I could start with you, and the suggestion from President Trump that the FAA is now hiring people with intellectual and psychiatric disabilities as air traffic controllers. Can we just straighten that point out first? Are they doing that?
Well, not to my knowledge. The air traffic control curriculum at the FAA Academy is very rigorous, and they do have to pass medical exams. I'm not a physician, I'm not a lawyer or a sociologist. I don't know exactly how they weigh race or medical disability in the hiring process.
Arthur?
Yeah, so in 42 years of practicing aviation law and literally being involved in every aspect of it, I could say, based on everything I've seen, heard, read, and been involved in, there is absolutely no ongoing practice now or ever by the Federal Aviation Administration to put any mentally or physically compromised person in a control tower, an FAA en route radar control tower. These are among the most talented, educated, and schooled professionals that you will ever see.
Okay.
So as far as the president's concerned, I implore his enthusiasm to put in the best and the brightest. But as far as people who are physically compromised, mentally or otherwise, no.
Fair enough. Alan, let's now move on to the crash over Washington, D.C. And specifically, the New York Times is saying there was only one air traffic controller instead of two on duty. Do you suspect that may be the cause of the crash?
Well, these accidents occur, usually have many, many causes, and whether or not it was a factor, that's up to the NTSB. They routinely operate with a single controller during periods when traffic is lower, but it's the call of the FAA tower supervisor to make that decision. So that's what the NTSB will have to address. Normally, and during busy periods, there's a controller handling the helicopters and a separate controller, another controller, handling the airliners, the fixed-wing aircraft. That was not the case at the time of the accident, apparently, but that's what the NTSB will have to determine.
Arthur, is there ever an occasion where a controller leaves their post against the guidelines and creates these sorts of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, so I can tell you that controllers do take breaks. A typical controller on duty will flag the supervising controller and say to him, I need to take a break. And then someone, and in this case, there was a trainee, also an experienced controller, right behind the controller on duty, and they'll just swap out. People, we're human, we need bathroom breaks or otherwise. So yes, that does take place. But right now, all we know is what we've heard, and that there was one controller on duty handling both the military traffic and the civilian traffic. And based on what I've seen, I do believe it was a busy time, and whether or not that was prudent to have one instead of two remains to be seen.
Okay. Does it indicate a wider problem at the FAA in understaffing air traffic control, Arthur?
Yeah. So as far as I'm concerned, the answer is an unqualified yes. Over the last decade in particular, commercial aviation has exploded in the United States. We have more daily operations, takeoff, landings, en route control, and at the same time, qualified controllers, the numerosity on duty have gone down. Hiring and firing of air traffic controllers has been a political football since the days of Ronald Reagan.
Alan, can I ask you, because there will be people who even inject DEI into this problem, and they will say that just have a look at the 2015 lawsuit and the lead plaintiff, Andrew Brigida. He claims that the FAA's obsession with DEI meant that he and many hundreds of other highly qualified white people were not hired. And this made the crash inevitable. Is it true that the FAA is turning down highly qualified white people?
The basic issue is, did they restrict the hiring of whites who are graduates, particularly those that are graduates of FAA training colleges, FAA-approved training colleges? That, I think, was the essence of the lawsuit. I've only heard allegations. They would ask questions about what type of music do you like? And of course, if you answered rap, they suspected you were black. If you, they ask you what is your favorite sport, if you answered basketball, that suggested that you were probably a black applicant. Now, these are what I've heard. I have not seen the actual questionnaire.
Arthur, is that actually what happened?
Well, aside from the allegations in the lawsuit, I can just say the whole concept of DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, has never been the subject of any formal crash, air traffic control, FOA. It's never been targeted as the cause of an accident. But the policy behind it is not to not bring in the best and the brightest. The policy behind it is to bring in the best and the brightest who may be part of a minority group, to give them a chance, or someone who, you know, lost a finger and who would otherwise be excluded.
We know that the current Transport Secretary, Sean Duffy, says the Biden administration didn't focus on safety. They were focused on piffling things like changing signs from cockpit to flight deck. Have you heard of these sorts of directives in the Biden administration? And do you think that Trump's emphasis on safety with the new memorandum will actually improve air safety?
So the answer to your two questions is no and yes. No, I have not heard anything along those lines from the Biden administration. As far as the Trump, we all agree. We want the best, the brightest, most qualified people in our cockpits as part of the air traffic control system, issuing commanding controls to flying aircraft, military, civilian, or otherwise.
Arthur Rosenberg and Alan Diehl, thank you both very much. Much appreciated. Well, we've looked at DEI in aviation, but of course it's to be found in every publicly funded institution. Here's what's going on in the LA Fire Department.
Is she strong enough to do this? Or, you couldn't carry my husband out of a fire. Which my response is, he got himself in the wrong place if I have to carry him out of a fire.
It's got so out of hand that even liberal comedians and satirists find it ridiculous.
You want to see somebody that responds to your house, your emergency, whether it's a medical call or a fire call, that looks like you.
Which would sound kind of racist if a Southern sheriff said it. The good news is our fire chief is a lesbian. Crowley's official bio says Chief Crowley leads a diverse department, creating, supporting, and promoting a culture that values diversity, inclusion, and equity while striving to meet and exceed the expectations of the communities. Well, you didn't exceed my expectations, which was that the whole city wouldn't burn down.
Well, it's not just the fire department. The police force has also felt the effects of DEI. Jim Vaglica is a former policeman with 30 years of experience. He spent half that time training America's elite SWAT teams. He told us that DEI meant that out-of-shape men and smaller women were hired. And because they could not restrain suspects, they ended up shooting them more than was necessary.
So how has DEI affected policing in my state, the state of Massachusetts, which is very progressive? We have what's called the physical agility test that you need to pass before you can become a police officer in this state, okay? And over the years, that test has been watered down time and time again to where it's just ridiculous. You would have to be such a physical wreck not to be able to pass this physical agility test, okay? The last thing they did that I know of, the most difficult obstacle in this test, it's sort of an obstacle course that you need to run. The most difficult obstacle was a 5-foot wall. And because obese people couldn't get over this wall, they put steps on it. So now just about everyone who wants to be a police officer can pass the physical agility test and get on the job. And now I have to work with these people. Okay, so if I'm counting on them as my backup, cover my 6 with my life you're talking about here. Let's say we're chasing an armed suspect and I jump over a wall. Now I got this person behind me and they're going to say, hey, where are the steps? There's supposed to be steps on this wall. And now what? I'm going to keep going by myself and this person's going to like run around the block or something? You're playing with people's lives. DEI is costing lives
So now let's look at what President Trump is doing to roll back DEI. And on day one, right after being sworn in, he signed an executive order terminating all DEI activities in the federal government. He then put all federal employees working on DEI on paid leave with a view to firing them as soon as possible.
All federal workers who carried out diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are on paid leave ahead of being laid off as the Trump administration moves to wipe out DEI across the government.
DEI would have ruined our country, and now it's dead.
DEI schemes tend to provide jobs and funding to women, ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, trans people, and disabled people. Basically, everyone who isn't a white heterosexual man. Liberals argue this addresses historic injustices, but conservatives say hiring should be based on merit, and DEI is actually against civil rights laws fought for by people like Martin Luther King.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Let's discuss this all now with our panel. And Dr. Kiki Ramsey is a psychologist and DEI advocate. Stefan Padfield leads an anti-woke think tank in Washington, D.C. And finally, TaChelle Lawson, author of Black is Not a Credential. Welcome to the program, all of you. You all have very interesting backgrounds. Dr. Kiki, let's start with you. So, Dr. Martin Luther King, they're saying, you know, it's about the content of your character, not the color of your skin. And President Donald Trump says that DEI essentially goes against civil rights laws that he and others fought for. Isn't it time DEI was done away with?
Absolutely not. What we're talking about when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is allowing others to treat everybody, including people with diverse backgrounds, as decent human beings. We want to be able to show up to the table just as everybody else and have a fair shot at having the opportunities and the support we need to be able to succeed in the workplace and in this country. So it's not time for us to do away DEI.
Stefan, do you accept that argument? It's just people being nice and giving everyone an equal chance.
No, I don't accept that argument. This is very classic, where you have the flowery language, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who could possibly be against that? But once you lift up the hood and look at what's actually being done in the name of DEI, it ends up being just straight up race and sex discrimination. Money being funneled to certain groups and taken from other groups, promotion and hiring being shifted to certain groups and taken from other groups. So it sounds great, and I would agree with everything that was just said if in fact that was how DEI was implemented. But what we have learned over and over again is that the way it's implemented, it just boils down to straight problematic and hurtful race and sex discrimination.
But Kiki's saying it gives everyone an equal opportunity to come to the table and compete for a job, does it not?
Well, we're at a place right now in our country where the balance has shifted so dramatically that you have white students pretending to be black in college applications because of all the benefits that are flowing to blacks in their application processes, right? We have $25 million reverse discrimination judgments coming down because companies are so built into this or bought into this idea that discrimination can only go one way. We've got programs that expressly say we're going to fund only black women in terms of entrepreneurs. And it just goes on and on and on. The idea that today a talented black man or black woman can't just be completely successful. I think there was a post the other day that said black buying power is $1.8 trillion in this country. We've got more black millionaires than ever. So this idea that there's this systemic racism bar against progress is basically just a way for the race industrial complex to keep pushing these programs.
Okay, Kiki, a quick response and then we're over to TaChelle.
Absolutely not. You ought to understand that in today's age, we are so behind. The idea that you feel that there is a fair playing field out there is ludicrous to me. We have never been in a post-racial era. There is still race that is involved in all of the decision making. What diversity, equity, and inclusion does is it gives us a fair chance to even come to the table.
TaChelle, I don't know who to believe, Kiki or Stefan. Do black people and other ethnic minorities need these DEI initiatives or not?
No. We don't necessarily need the initiatives, but I want to expand on this a little bit more and emphasize that diversity isn't the issue. Inclusion isn't the issue. It's the implementation of DEI. So what Dr. Kiki is saying is this needs to be fair. It sounds really nice. It's just not necessarily about moral mandates. And unfortunately, DEI has become more about moral mandates. And the challenge with that is whoever's holding the stick gets to determine whether or not the morality has been implemented properly. That's not an effective way of measuring anything. So this is what's being rejected. Like Stefan just said, the problem isn't diversity. The problem isn't even inclusion. The problem is how it's been implemented.
Kiki, let me ask you about the E in DEI. It's not equality, it's equity. Now, the distinction there, I'm told, is that with equality, everyone gets a chance to apply for the job. But with equity, no matter what, there will be a portion of candidates who are ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, disabled and so on, who are guaranteed to get that job, whether or not they're qualified. Is that what's happening, Kiki?
No, absolutely not. Equity means giving people a fair shot in the sense that, yes, they may come to the table with differences, but when it comes to equity, it's still giving them a chance to be able to come to the table. See, the issue that it seems that we're arguing is based on whether DE&I means that you're qualified. People are pitting DE&I against merit, and that's not the issue here. There are plenty of candidates out there that have merit, but at the end of the day, if you don't get an opportunity to come to the table and even show your skills, then you won't get the opportunity. Okay, that also includes equity.
We're coming towards the end of the program, but Stefan, just quickly, is there a difference between equality and equity that means people are being unfairly treated?
Absolutely. I mean, you just have to look at the actual documents and the intellectual history behind the use of the word equity. And so, I mean, I just was recently looking at something, I believe it was Nissan, where they flat out said equity means equality of outcomes. And you look at the programs that are being pushed in the name of equity. They have actual goals, 5% of this, 10% of that. It's just social engineering.
I will say this. It's time to move past the why. We know that diversity and inclusion isn't necessarily bad. It's how. How is it being implemented? So to Stefan's point, if we're putting programs in place and calling it equity, but only certain groups are benefiting from it, it's actually not fair, and it's also not inclusion. So it's contradicting the very purpose of DEI. Affirmative action, I believe, is an extension of that fallacy.
Kiki, would you agree with the Supreme Court that affirmative action is unconstitutional?
No, and the reason why I don't agree with that is that if there was a fair playing field in the beginning, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. But what I think we failed to agree upon, even on this panel, is that the playing field has always been against people from diverse backgrounds.
Stefan, just wrapping up, is there another way that you can think of, other than DEI, that can address inequalities in society?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at what is the ultimate focus of these issues of inequality is economic inequality. And we can focus on economic inequality by our corporations, by our governments, and not have this hyper focus on this extremely divisive race and sex discrimination. Just improve the economic status, target people who are behind economically in ways that are going to help them prosper, and you can have all the issues addressed that you're concerned about.
Stefan Padfield, TaChelle Lawson, Kiki Ramsey, thank you all very much. Much appreciated. Well, we're going to give the last word to the man and woman on the street now. What do they make of DEI? Here's what we found here in London. Thanks for watching.
Should companies be forced to implement DEI in the workplace?
I don't know whether they should be forced to do it, but unfortunately it's just the way of the world now, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Why do you think that?
Equality for everyone. Yeah. Everyone should be paid fairly and treated fairly. Everyone's the same. Everyone's working the same.
Yeah, exactly what Brooke said. Like, you can't not have inclusion of diversity.
You should be hired for your
what you can offer, not because, you know, I'm black. I don't want anyone to hire me just because they need more black people in their company.
Yeah, absolutely. We are from Sweden and it's quite normal.
I'm a scuffler, so I haven't seen any women scufflers.
It's a very difficult question. I mean, it's down to the employer themselves to decide that, you know.
Workplaces should represent what the public looks like, and there are spaces where they're mostly white, and I think especially in London, that's not the population, and it should reflect that.
It doesn't matter where you're from. If you've worked and you've earned a qualification or you've got the skills to work in that job, then you should get it. That doesn't matter what colour you are, what gender, what race.
I feel like it's an unfair advantage, like on even like not even racist, say white people. Genuinely, we now have the lesser advantage.
You know, it doesn't mean that people are less qualified if you're using DEI.
Well, you shouldn't be forced to hire any particular type of person. You should just hire who's good for the job, who you want to do the job.